but it's really wonderful to have you all join us tonight as we celebrate and honor Sandra Vivanco, beloved professor of architecture and critical ethnic studies, who passed away on this day 2 years ago. Both Shaila and I are really happy to be able to have this second Sandra Vivanco Memorial Lecture. And I'd like to introduce Shaila now, chair of the Critical Ethnic Studies program. We'll say a few words about Sandra, after which I'll introduce our speaker, Elena Tudela. Shaila.
Thank you, Keith. Alafia, and welcome, friends and relations. We really thank you all for being here. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous nations, which is customary here at California College of the Arts. California College of the Arts campuses are located in Huichin and Yalamu, also known as Oakland and San Francisco, respectively, on the unceded territories of the Chochenyo and Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who have continuously lived upon this land since time immemorial. We recognize the historic discrimination and violence inflicted upon Indigenous peoples in California and through the Americas, including their forced removal from ancestral lands, the deliberate and systematic destruction of their communities and culture. CCA honors Indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, here and around the world. We wish to pay respect to local elders, including those of the lands from which you are joining us virtually today. We recognize the sovereignty of these nations and advocate for the inclusion of Indigenous worldviews in art and design practice. If you are unsure whose land you are currently residing upon, we encourage you to visit native-land.ca. I want to say that I am beyond proud to represent Critical Ethnic Studies to support our second Sandra Vivanco Memorial Lecture with the Architecture Division. Sandra Vivanco, our cherished professor of architecture and Critical Ethnic Studies, was our dedicated teacher, beloved colleague, and cherished human being. Her warm and caring spirit was evident in her mentorship with students, and her passion for architecture helped to deepen the pedagogy not only here at CCA, but in all of the places that she taught and traveled and touched, from Bolivia to Brazil to Mexico and beyond. Anyone who met, worked with, befriended, or loved Sandra can attest that her wealth of knowledge matched her charisma. It matched her generosity. It matched her genuineness. And may her enthusiasm, strength, and excitement about the intersections of humanity, architecture, and joy continue to inspire all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaila. Make sure I'm unmuted. I would just echo Shaila's comments. Sandra is one of the first people that I met when I came to interview at CCA, and her passion for the school, her passion for the students, her passion for opening up architecture, making architecture more equitable and accessible to everyone was in almost every question that she asked me. And it really made me believe that CCA would be the right choice for me if I were to be offered the job. And I'm very glad that I was offered the job and had an opportunity to work with Sandra. Before I introduce Elena, I'd like to share some information about upcoming events in our series. And I think both of these events also speak to the values that Sandra embodied and spoke to in her work here at the college. On April 7th at 6 p.m., June Grant will deliver the lecture Impatience Next, which we're happy to be co-presenting with the Museum of the African Diaspora here in San Francisco. And on April 14th, live and in person on our San Francisco campus, which will be the first for us since the beginning of the pandemic, Jenny Odell will be the keynote speaker for the 2022 Ecopoiesis Gathering, organized by CCA faculty members Leslie Roberts, Adam Marcus, and Christopher Folliers. You can register to attend both events by visiting our website at scaffold.architecture.cca.edu. I'm very pleased now to introduce our speaker, Elena Tudela. It's particularly fitting that Elena is delivering the second memorial lecture in Sandra's honor I know that Sandra was a great admirer of Elena and her work, which aligns so beautifully with the values that Sandra embodied in her teaching, practice, and life. Elena is an associate professor at the Facultad de Arquitectura at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, and a co-founder of the Office of Urban Resilience, ORU, an urban design and applied research practice, specializing in resilience and climate-sensitive landscape infrastructures. She holds a degree in architecture from UNAM, a master's degree from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard, and is currently a PhD candidate in architecture at UNAM. Elena is the recipient of many major awards, and in 2021, along with Isadora Hastings and Mauricio Rocha, she curated the Mexico National Pavilion at the 17th Venice Architecture Biennale. She's a member of the Advisory Council for Public Space and the Resilience Council of Mexico City, and is part of the National System of Art Creators for Mexico's Ministry of Culture since 2020. I'm excited tonight to learn more about the work of ORU. We work collaboratively with the multinational team of architects, anthropologists, and geographers to promote and develop projects in support of sustainable, resilient, and equitable cities and landscapes in Mexico and beyond. Please join me in welcoming Elena Tudela to CCA.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. You can hear me, right? Great. So first, I would like to thank the CCA for inviting me to give this lecture in the memory of Sandra Vivanco, a very dear friend of mine and of many other colleagues, not only in Mexico, of course, as in many parts of the world she lived in and traveled to. Thank you, Adam, Marcus, and Keith Krumwider for suggesting me and extending me this kind invitation to form part of this important memorial lecture, which I'm so grateful and honored to be giving here today. Let me share with you my screen. And I think it's on now. 1 second. Okay. So when I was thinking about what to say and how to structure my presentation, many thoughts came to mind. And I traveled back in time to her visits and longer stays in Mexico and my time myself in San Francisco when she invited me to be a guest critic to different CCA studios, getting to know better your fantastic academic and student community. I was so humbled by the invitation that I wondered what she would feel proud for me to present to you, as if I was having a conversation with her about it. In doing this, I was surprised and deeply moved because I realized the many ways in which she had an impact in my life and work. I was not aware of how much I had learned from and with her in the few years I was lucky enough to share her friendship. I realized how much of a bridge she was for many of us, either by introducing me to many new friends, colleagues, and acquaintances, but also by deepening many other relationships I already had, even in Mexico City. She brought many people together, and in my case, these encounters have changed the way I think about design and therefore practice it. I feel I'm still learning from her, even if she's not around anymore. And in trying to synthesize these ideas in my head, I chose these 4 words that lingered in conversations with her and through the collaborative work we did together since 2018 when I met her, and that I chose to name this lecture after. So the first one's identity. I'm just going to run briefly through them, explaining why I chose them. So the first one, identity. Most of her work revolved around how to build, promote, question, and/or design for a diversity of cultural identities. No one like her to read, pick up, and understand cultural expressions and translate them to design practice and language in creative ways, such as when she proposed working with unconventional materials, such as corn husks, loteria game cards, and Mexican market bag fabric for our material cultures workshop with CCA and UNAM students, as well as professors. I remember the way she challenged the definitions of muro and pared, both Spanish terms for walls, but one with a masculine and closed connotation and the other one feminine and more flexible as a term, putting forward different ways in which to reinterpret gender identity in architectural practice today. The second one is hybridity. We used to talk about transcending different binary notions and the need for the emergence of hybrid conditions, bridging scales of space and time when needed. She looked for ways of generating new meaning through co-creation and co-design. In this workshop that we held together, she put this to practice by working with craft women and men and students. We also teamed up UNAM and CCA students, an interesting experiment. We learned a lot by observing the differences, conflicts, agreements, and the interweaving of ideas through this experience. When talking about her research on Clara Porcet, Mexican designer, I learned how she sorted out gender obstacles. I also learned how resourceful Sandra was to bypass information inconsistencies in her research findings through being able to slide from one field of knowledge to another, such as the way Clara Porcet would do. She was not a conventional researcher, Sandra. She was venturesome, curious, and was not afraid to change her research questions if needed. And that allowed her to produce new knowledge and hybrid opportunities for design. The third word is collaboration. This is pretty obvious. She made collaborations meaningful and the most fun. She was a natural at navigating collaborative work, extending it to dinner tables with generosity and to friendships in many cases. I still remember so many sobremesas, a term we use in Spanish to refer to conversations or to conversation time once you finish eating. A good sobremesa makes for great occasions. She was great at sobremesas. The last time I saw her was at a Peruvian restaurant in Mexico City after having ceviche, making plans for new collaborations which were sadly and unfortunately not able to develop. The last word is scarcity. I guess being Latin American, both of us being Latin American women, we understood this challenge very well, she particularly in a good way. It is undeniable, it is an undeniable condition for most designers in the global South. However, she was not at all stymied by it. She even found it productive. And when I say scarcity, not only do I mean economically speaking, but also time-wise. Most projects required to be developed and implemented in unrealistic timeframes, and she was not scared of this. And she was ambitious. She was very ambitious in terms of what could be achieved in brief periods of time. Such was the case of our workshop again. In a couple of days, the project was ready to be exhibited and looking great with surprising results for everyone. Her confidence was contagious. She strived for the best and we all delivered, even when initially some of us felt a bit unsure about our own and the group's capabilities. So you can see in these two images side by side, Sandra's presence in these collaborative endeavors, one as a hands-on in the center of the field, leading the process person, bringing interesting opinions and different voices into the mix. And then to the right, once it was done, being proud and excited, not only about the results, but already thinking about further possibilities and opportunities for the future. So one of the qualities of her work I appreciate more is her ability to think and do at the same time, while producing quite high quality results, both in the theoretical and practical realms. Ever since I began studying architecture from my first year, I knew this was what I wanted to do too. Maybe it's something easier to think in the context of Latin America, where academia is strongly linked to real situations. And it can also at the same time be a pitfall that reduces practice to problem solving, which in turn can hinder more visionary ideas or speculative ideas. But Sandra and her practice went beyond problem solving, and that is something I'm still learning from her. So these 4 words that I just mentioned permeate my work and have been present in it in different ways, which I will explain now. So I currently hold a position as an associate professor and researcher at UNAM, and at the same time, I have my own urban design firm, as Keith already mentioned in the generous introduction, ORU, Office for Urban Resilience, which I co-founded along with Adriana Chavez and Victor Rico. I have 1 foot in academia and 1 in practice, while I'm also a PhD student trying to test some of these ideas further. I teach a seminar called Interstices, which is the group that we shared work with CCA students for the workshop in 2018. And through this workshop, we explore the possibilities of design, including architecture, urbanism, and landscape architecture unrestrictedly, to challenge conventional development models that do not integrate the urban with the environmental and find alternative possibilities or seek to find alternative possibilities for design agency vis-a-vis the most pressing challenges we face today as human and non-human communities. I am also currently working on a project I named Uncertain Futures, a risk atlas for design practices, as a current member of Mexico's National System of Art Creators. I like a good challenge, as did Sandra. Sandra Vivanco was and still is a North Star and beacon of light for me. I believe I shared with Sandra an interest in applied research from a design as research and research as design point of view. So I divided my presentation in 2 parts. First, a set of conceptual guidelines I believe are currently emerging and that I constantly delve on, mainly through academia and research. And secondly, a set of projects we've developed at ORU, where we try to put some of these ideas to practice. And part of the questions that we are constantly asking ourselves at the office is this one that you see here. We ask ourselves, what is the agency of design in the 21st century? And we believe it's time for designers to address pressing challenges instead of avoiding them or relating to them from a personal and individual way only. As they need to integrate the environmental with the cultural, it's becoming more and more evident, this need to have both realms operating within the same table. Problems have arisen, such as those derived from greenwashing, not only in communications and marketing strategies, but also present in architecture and design. I believe that we must move away from good intentions and branding to engage in a more politically conscious direction that incorporates technical with cultural values. So on the one hand, architecture materializes our social practices, relationships, and values. And on the other hand, the arrangement of space defines us in turn. How can architects endow people with a direct agency in the production of space, leaving aside the needs of the market? What does it mean that the practice of architecture ceases to focus on final products to design processes of co-production and self-management? We also ask ourselves, what is the aesthetic proposal of this way of thinking space? How is it defined if it's no longer in the singular? The ownership of the planet's land is in a few hands and tends to be tending towards a monopolistic situation, precarious tenants or small mortgaged owners. There is also an evident and unsustainable gender inequality. There's few owners of land and properties, and most of them are men. Many places experience a culture of fear and insecurity. Mexico is one of them, which is currently a terrible problem. How can a new ethic for architecture in favor of the environment, equality, and freedom be proposed? So these are some of the questions underlying most of our work, and that form part of this larger question about the agency of design in this century. So one of the backbones of our work relies in risk and resilience. And risk and resilience has become this axis of our practice and the focus of most of my research. As we become increasingly aware of the complex problems in which we are undoubtedly immersed, some choose to remain indifferent, others deem it too late to take action or simply not worth the effort to improve the current conditions. Some of us, however, recognize the need for collaborative action. We observe and listen, we try to experiment, and we learn to avoid falling into despair or baseless hope. For those of us working in architecture and design in general, it is no longer possible to relegate these matters to purely technical and/or technological solutions. Everyday cultural values must be integrated to solve these issues. We must reflect on the need for displacing the confines and spheres of what we understand as architectural to broaden its capacity to contribute to better and more equitable conditions of collective life. In this first conceptual part of the presentation, and based on an article I wrote as a curator of the Mexico's Pavilion in the past architecture Venice Biennale for its catalog, I will focus on 10 types of displacements for architectural and design practice that I believe are relevant to consider today when we incorporate resilience to design. And here is the list of the 10 that I will go through now. So the first one has to do with the displacement towards collective processes. Responding to various clients, including those not responsible for the funding of the project, has become really relevant when thinking of the collective. Also recognizing multiple actors or stakeholders and collaborating between designers and players in other disciplines. Emphasizing the process over the finished project and conceptualizing projects at different periods of time is also now a more common practice. And here what you see is a diagram of the different moments in the design process that we try to work through. So instead of just thinking of a project as an object, we think of it as a process where we can contribute in different ways. The first one is the shared vision and preliminary studies, where you build a shared vision and data gathering and preliminary technical studies for an integrated diagnosis. There's also a part where we work on resilience analysis and mapping of urban, environmental, and social dynamics to visualize these problems. And then we move towards an urban strategy and schematic design that includes different stages from the urban strategy itself, but also the financial and maintenance plan, the public participation and engagement strategy, or the conceptual design. Moving further along these phases, we have the design development and construction documents, which does focus more on the physicality, materiality of the projects. And that includes preliminary technical studies, communication strategies, and design development and construction documents. Also public bidding if applicable. And then we try to also get involved in the implementation, monitoring, and evaluation stage, where we participate in those construction processes. And then we're not there yet, but we would love to go back and monitor and evaluate how it's been used and what's happening with these projects that we're working on. Most of the work we develop is collective, whether it's a project, a built project or not. For us, it is the only way to move forward. We focus on design as a research, experimentation, implementation, and learning collective and open process. So, well, this is an example of such practices in the office. This is a number that we were invited to edit for a digital magazine, El Eco, Experimental Museum, which we call Resilient Urbanism and Plastic Elasticity, which we just recently edited. And we invited a group of artists and architects to propose a resilient act. And then we had a conversation between the group of artists and architects and ourselves, as well as with the museum organization committee. And that was transcribed and also included in the website of the magazine. So in a way, we can't imagine our practice without these collective processes. The second point has to do with systemic thinking. Constructing a system is equivalent to discussing and defining a set of sensible relations to identify the parameters that intervene on the problem at a time scale that corresponds to the project. Complex systems feature a set of interrelations that make up a dynamic structure. They work as an organized entity, the definition of which gives direction to its possible future transformation. Constructing the system means choosing the abstracted elements and identifying a certain number of significant relationships between this set of elements. In other words, a system is a representation of a slice of reality that can be analyzed as an organized totality. And complex systems are characterized by the confluence of multiple processes whose interrelationships constitute this structure that is understood as an organized whole. And therefore, a system is a conceptual construction made by either the researcher, observer, student, or whomever's working on the project, with which he represents what he considers to be the most significant activities and factors that are identified and inferred from reality for a given purpose. So we believe there's still a lot of work to be done in order to incorporate systemic thinking into design practices at a more practical level. And well, this is the work of Alan Berger that has this scheme of systemic design, and it's one of the possible approaches or territorial approaches that links regional scale and local site, and it's quite interesting. But we believe there's a lot of ways that we can work with this idea, this notion of systemic thinking. One of the binary notions that have affected our ability to address socio-environmental problems today, it's the nature-culture dichotomy that we've been working under for so many years now. Our natural environments are increasingly being replaced by a world designed, not exclusively by designers though. While it is becoming more and more evident from issues such as climate change that we cannot detach ourselves from our natural basis. The economy is subordinated to natural processes, and designers could have an active role in making this more evident to all stakeholders in any given project or site. The next point has to do with displacement towards observation. So to observe is to construct a new understanding of the world, a kind of architectural reconstruction within the individual mind. Observation is a design activity. In that way, it becomes an invention. Aldo Rossi, in his book Autobiografía Científica, portrays the emotional significance of observation and links it to memory, as his quote here exemplifies. And it reads like this: "Perhaps the observation of things has remained my most important formal education, for observation later becomes transformed into memory. Now I seem to see all the things I have observed arranged like tools in a neat row. They are aligned as in a botanical chart or a catalog or a dictionary. But this catalog, lying somewhere between imagination and memory, is not neutral. It always reappears in several objects and constitutes their deformation and in some way their evolution." We suggest that architecture can be not only created, but also discovered through observation practices. To achieve this, we must choose what, where, when, and for how long to observe as an initial step in design and throughout the process of design. Observation, in that understood in this way, should be patient, sharp, and open to difference and change. There is a correspondence then between the ways of seeing and the ways of designing. And here are some examples of possibilities of discovering architecture instead of creating it. And most of them have to do with self-management and self-organization practices, or for instance, art, and how art can also become an input for architecture, or the way nature disposes of spatial conditions that could also be read and interpreted towards design possibilities and speculations. The next point is the displacement towards the acceptance of uncertainty. So this is one of the main things I'm working on for my Uncertain Futures research project that I was mentioning a bit ago. In contemplating changing haphazard conditions, architecture eludes a single definition and hence produces multiple differences. Chance is not linear, singular, or static. It is spatial, multiple, and has limited duration in time, since it generates connections between the unknown and the accidental. And architecture can leave room for that. Here is a quote by Aldo van Eyck that I also appreciate when speaking of chance and uncertainty. And it reads, whatever space and time mean, place and occasion mean more. There is also this quote from Georgia Manalopoulou that reads like this: the architect's constant negotiation between design and chance is an enactment of the dialogue between the finite solidity of the architectural object and the uncertainty of experience. Design and chance are two inseparable and dialectical concerns in the practice of architecture. It is just that chance is not talked about as much. By breaking our sense of order and the usual structures of seeing and understanding, chance becomes a threat to architects. And I'd like to talk about this specific example of Lina Bobardi's MASP building, the Museum of Art in Sao Paulo, which is a great example of this notion. By lifting the building, she created a monumental and generous space between the space beneath the building that lets the city define its uses and program, and extends the park that surrounds it and the infrastructure and the highway that goes beneath it. People and time complete her work. She lets go in this way of the notion of control, characteristic of many modern movement buildings and architectural practices even today. And she does not intend to tame chance or defend form from contingency. The next point is a displacement towards the consideration of the human sphere as a part of nature. We've been separating them for a really long time now. Prior to and during the beginning of the Enlightenment, it seemed that a relationship of reciprocity was established between society and nature, as could be seen in the work of people such as Goethe, who combined art and science with little effort, or the German romantic painter Caspar David Friedrich, who seemed to show no tension or alienation between his characters and the natural landscapes in which they found themselves. This is modified with the introduction of modernity. We find ourselves in a constant narrative of tensions between nature and culture, where at times nature has been seen as a threat to societies, and at others, the latter is seen as a punishing nature. So there's this article by architect Rem Koolhaas in Ecological Urbanism, this book in 2016, defined it as a relationship of tension between progress against apocalypse. So we are either trying to control it or afraid of it. It is in this context that the notion of universal nature is presented, where human civilization is understood as a part of it, although obviously with the power of transformation of its environment unprecedented among any other species. And so this is how the human being transforms along or at the same time with the concept of nature. So you have probably seen these type of images on social networks where we recognize more company logos than animal species or plant species. The branding of the commercial world has become more widespread than our understanding of biophysical processes and the recognition that we share a planet with many other species that we even depend on. We are now recognizing and understanding that living beings with whom we share this planet, as we do in complex configurations of intertwined and interdependent worlds. And this is vital to the sustainability of life, particularly ours. Loss of biodiversity is related to the decay of ecosystems and the services they provide. The sixth one is the displacement towards multiple scales. We must eschew the paradigm that considers that the human being as a universal measure of all things, to enter deeper territories and incorporate an understanding of urban metabolism that requires an understanding of different scales of time and space. This is the beginning and end of a study we did at ORU of the evolution of Mexico City, one of the most drastic transformations of an urban environment in the world. From a city in a lake system to a 20 million inhabitant metropolis that forgets its lacustrine past, but is reminded of it every rainy season with ever more intense floodings. If we were able to drain the basin and transform our environment to this extent in this few, I mean, well, it's a small amount of time, if you think of it at a larger scale, then we are also able to imagine an alternative city that recognizes its social and environmental resources towards a more resilient and sustainable future. This is an image that we drew to understand better how this metropolis relates to its territory at a larger scale. And how it belongs to the largest urban system of the country by identifying its geologic and biologic condition deriving from its position within the neovolcanic axis, which also explains why cities they settled here, because of the fertility of the soil, but also its reason is the volcanic activity and the seismic activity, which we sometimes forget. And there's this quote I like from Manuel de Sola Morales that says, design has the capacity of combining centimeters to kilometers. We need to find a way in which the design of the centimeters has a positive impact on the kilometers. And I think this is part of our operation at ORU, where we always try to understand it at different scales to be able to see through many obstacles that sometimes hinder visibility. The seventh point has to do with towards plurality and inclusivity. The world has been narrated largely from the Western perspective of the white man. It is imperative to recognize and value the multiplicity of lifestyles, beliefs, aspirations, and habitats among which we must live collectively. This in turn implies recognition of the fact that we are all designers. Buckminster Fuller in this image, it's here because he linked nature and culture, making radical inventories of both spheres. And he promoted the intensification of the industrial age and improved through the improvement of resource distribution, finding that the specific problem that we needed to address. He understood human industry as a tool for providing equality. He also developed very imaginative engineering mechanisms and scientific management resources through technology and ecological interrelationship that did slide between scales, encompassing everything from a geometric figure to a planetary project. And you can see here the World Game report included a global database with cybernetic mechanisms that managed exchanges between natural and man-made systems. And well, the Dymaxion projection world map, which also spoke of this redistribution and rethinking in a more less skewed view of the world if you compare it to the Mercator. On the other hand, the democratic political space has placed emphasis on the agreement of ideas, on common agreements. However, No political space is exempt from this agreement, which on many occasions has been silenced or made invisible or used politically for the objectives of some of its stakeholders. Sometimes circumstances arise that are hardly reconcilable. And this is the case for, at least in Mexico, for segregation with these walls that divide. And speaking of walls, paredes, muros, that Sandra used to talk a lot about, that divide the poor from the rich. Or also the gender issues we have in Mexico. 11 women die every day in Mexico due to gender insecurity and violence. So this becomes very relevant when you talk about public space and what architecture promotes or fosters. The next displacement speaks of infrastructural design towards infrastructural design. The design of infrastructure defines that which lends support to urban life. It represents for architecture the need to move away from its cultural confines into a more everyday qualities that make it more relevant in urban and environmental contexts. Infrastructure design considers not only geometries and forms, but also behaviors, actions, dispositions, and here are some examples of the ways infrastructure has been shaping territories. This is landscape as infrastructure theory from Pierre Bélanger, or field conditions from Stan Allen, which you probably all know well about. And I guess one of the most interesting qualities of infrastructure design is that not only these geometry, shapes, or profiles are decided, but also the behaviors, actions, and dispositions, which actually multiply the possibilities of design. The ninth one has to do with displacement towards the ecological. And well, sustainable design practices are not usually contemplated for their contribution to excellent design, but innovation is needed regarding sustainability as it contributes to design, as well as design's cultural dimension to increase its value and integration. Ecology provides scientific tools with which to approach the construction of sustainability. It provides useful technical knowledge to redefine the insertion of man in nature and reconfigure natural and artificial systems. However, it requires more than just technical and scientific criteria. It requires a cultural adoption of values that allow societies to link directly with them. And this is an example, Design with Nature by Ian McCarg, that actually tried to do those two things. Ecology, particularly contemporary ecology, is positioned as one of the most appropriate fields of knowledge to speak of integration between society and nature. It has this transversal character that allows it to do so in an agile way. From the reflections around ecology, it is possible to reduce the gap between the organic and the mechanical. And lastly, the urgency, a displacement towards urgency of action. We have a brief window, possibly limited to this decade, to successfully respond to the environmental and social crisis we are currently immersed in, which confers a sense of urgency to any human intervention. We have no time to lose on a whole universe of design possibilities to explore. The pandemic has presented us with extreme scenarios and laid bare how fragile what we value most is, life and health. Turbulence is at hand, and as in any global crisis, extraordinary political measures have been needed. The paradigm that defines the range of what is feasible and acceptable within public political discourse in any given moment is known as the Overton window. In facing this crisis, but not only, also the war, the Ukrainian war currently going on in Europe, these conditions have modified and widened the Overton window, this window, something that has not yet happened with regards to the climate crisis and the global catastrophe it might entail. So we must take advantage of the increased acceptance and desire for transformation, along with the desire not to return to the previous normality, to stop the processes that feed into a crisis even more significant than the pandemic. What can we do as designers and architects to contribute to this urgent change and or adapt to what is coming? We must be capable of developing new, more just imaginaries from within design, and this will only be possible collectively. This is a map that we worked on to understand the sea level rise in Mexico under different scenarios, and then also the fact that contributions and impacts of climate change are not just. Those who contribute the least greenhouse gases will be most impacted by climate change. So now I move forward towards explaining a couple of the projects that I've been working on and that explain a little bit further these ideas. This is the first one, and they're set up in scales. The first one is this extra small artistic installation that I co-curated. We also did the content editing and the design of this pavilion for the 17th International Architecture Exhibition in Venice that we named Displacements. So and this is an interpretation diagram of a map of Mexico and these displacements. So in the current context with multiple realities in conflict and also the standstill forced by the pandemic, we sought to reflect on displacement understood in terms of social and natural systems, also inequality, environmental degradation, risk of disasters and violence. We framed contemporary architectural practices as complex networks of various displacement factors which have historically shaped our territory, and the architect as a mediator of such displacements. The pavilion focused on the implications of design on displacements at different scales of time and space, whether promoted, desired, harnessed, or avoided to foster more equitable, fair, and sustainable environments. Architecture rarely considers the direct or indirect effects it has on the generation of conditions that lead to displacement. It is centered more on end products than on processes in dialogue with subjects, objects, and systems that are constantly moving in different temporalities. By generating awareness of these consequences, architecture can establish a better relationship with its context and contribute to strengthening a sense of community, empathy, restitution, and recognition of the most vulnerable social ecosystems. So the pavilion sought to promote architects' ability to recognize, observe, and analyze the different forces that drive displacements. These transcend borders and boundaries, and in their passage through different geographies, they also draw pauses, thresholds, and changes, of course. Addressing these conditions can help build more equitable, autonomous, and desirable scenarios for the plurality of subjects and ecosystems involved. So the design of the pavilion was based on a collective creative process as a laboratory of ideas, led by the curatorial committee and developed in conjunction with a selection of 12 participants, architects. It was constituted as a critical exercise with a spatial and material exploration defined by the dialogue between curators and participants, and thus eluding authorship. The laboratory emphasizes the value of processes where the final result was the expression of the dialogue of ideas and therefore inviting reflection rather than unique and specific solutions. Thought in conversation through 5 sessions between curators and participants, as well as contribution of images, representational documents, and interviews, represent the basis for the development of the project. The design generated an experience of spatial sequences that you can see here in this plan that explored sensory registers through architectural conditions associated with different forms of displacement at different scales through diverse territories and landscapes. The museographic content consisted of audio and video projections that responded to these reflections, dialogue, and exchange using the selected projects as source of content. Few museographic elements were used, a set of walls of suspended plumbed wires that do not touch the floor. These walls, on the one hand, limit the circulation of visitors and guide the trajectories through the pavilion, and on the other hand, act at certain points as screens for the different projections, with an additional support of textile meshes to increase their visibility a little bit more. 4 projectors and 4 loudspeakers were placed in different positions in the pavilion. In the center, in this central part where the plums and the set of the suspended plumb wires is elevated or lifted from the ground, there's the main loudspeaker. And different soundscapes were designed to convey these displacements through each of these speakers. The images are not intended to be sharp or clear, but rather as they move across the threaded walls to evoke different forms of displacement associated with architecture. And the use of plumb lines responds to different meanings, to give structure and order to a collectivity of individual elements, but also to indicate a series of coordinates on a plan and to refer to construction work processes of plumbs and cords. At the end of the tour, of the trajectory, the participants' projects can be seen together with a summary of the glossary of terms that form part of the contents exposed. Each project of each participant corresponds to one term that you can see some of them here. And these are some of the words that we use for this glossary: illusion, kinship, the inexistent, natural contract, pluriverse, ecotone, accident, among others. Unlike a dictionary, a glossary compiles terms that deal with the same subject, but that are little known or less known, subject to interpretation, and used in a specific context, in this case, that of architecture. So each project was assigned a term from the glossary in order to have 12 reflections on the theme of the pavilion, displacements. And as part of the editorial structure, 3 levels of content were proposed. The first corresponds to the technical content of the project developed by the participants, which is shown exactly as the project is. The second consists of the curatorial reading in relation to the theme of displacements. And finally, the third and the most abstract level, which explored a fiction generated from each of these words and the ideas evoked from the projects at hand. So in this way, we sought to build an atmosphere of dream as a nod to Roland Barthes' provocative text of How to Live Together, novel simulations of some everyday spaces. And we refer to one of his phrases that says, dreaming aloud and investigation. So the pavilion proposed to contemplate the architectural projection as a process that makes room for fiction as a method. And this is part of the projects that were selected, the 12 projects, all of them coming from very scarce resources, as you can see in some of these images, with very few materials, like in this case, stones, just piled as these concentric circles, and very basic materials. And this is the result of the pavilion and how the experience was worked in this space that we needed to darken in order for the experience to be actually to operate with all of these projections happening at different time frames in a very choreographic way. So here are some of those images. And there are several images because it was really hard to portray these ideas if you're not moving along the exhibition, if you're just bringing them to a presentation, but I hope they're clear enough. So here are some of them. And sometimes the word would appear and sometimes the images associated with that word of the glossary would show. And this is at the end, you would get to see not only the words and their definitions and how they suggested interpretation in architecture, but also the projects of the architects, the selected architects as well. And so these are more images concerning that, some of those projections. and the plants and threads. The next project is a medium-sized project, which is of public infrastructure. At ORU, basically, we work only collective and public space projects. We rarely do any private work, basically because that's our experience of the three partners is within the public realm. And so this specific project is a set of build projects that SEDATU, which is the Ministry of Urban and Territorial and Agrarian Development for the country, promoted through this urban improvement program that's been building almost 800 projects around the country. And so we were assigned to 2 cities. The first one, Los Cabos, Baja California Sur, in 2019. It's a design that we did along with Julian Arroyo, who also knew very well Sandra Vivanco Arroyo Cheto. So Sandra lived at Julian Arroyo's grandfather's house, and Gabriela Suara. And we just recently were nominated for the Mies Crown Hall Americas Prize with this project. And then I'll show the next project that we're currently building in Tultitlán, state of Mexico, which is also a design by ORU, but with the participation of Del Distrito, Taller, Architects, and Ricardo Garcia Santander. So the first one is in Los Cabos, and so you can see the position of those 2 blue pins to the north of the map. And obviously, Los Cabos is well known for its touristic activity, which is nowhere near where these projects are. And so we thought of them as infrastructure in 3 different ways. One is a microclimatic to improve the quality of the public space in terms of its of the high temperatures that can be reached in this area of the country. Also, as a socio-environmental infrastructure, because of the lack of public space in these northern and very marginalized areas of the city. And the third one is a resilient infrastructure that would actually improve the offer that the city has for disasters in terms particularly of coastal flooding, droughts, and also hurricanes. So Baja California Sur is the most arid state in Mexico with the highest number of direct impacts from hurricanes and tropical storms. So to us, it was very important to address this issue, particularly in very vulnerable areas with vulnerable population. And so this is the project. The first one, it's a set of 2 projects actually. This one is smaller in its site, but the building is larger than the other one that I'll show in a little second. And this one we named Shade Garden, trying to create a public space that could be used as many hours of the day as possible. So the skate park was oriented where the shade of the building could offer a better use of the space within the, for the morning and the midday. Otherwise, these spaces would not be used until nights, which is usually what happens in the city. It's a sports center, so, and we try to provide as much vegetation as possible. It's native vegetation, and that requires very little water for it to subsist in this climate, and also is vegetation that they can relate to because it's from this area. While in the touristic section of the city, all of the vegetation comes from other places of the world, and people are used to seeing palm trees and other types of vegetation that has nothing to do with these ecosystems that are in a desert-like condition. So The program includes a professional sports court, a covered open space with the court, bleachers, restrooms, and a cistern, a space for calisthenics with a jogging track, and a space with playground equipment for children. As I was mentioning, the vegetation is low in water consumption and irrigation, and also every single material that we used, we tried to make them low maintenance. It's an open plan, covered space that has a saw shape oriented to limit direct solar incidence by encouraging the installation of solar panels on the exposed surface. Also to generate homogeneous illumination with natural light from the north during the day, but also to conduct south winds from cyclones outside of the public space, but admitting north winds to improve microclimatic comfort. This would reduce thermal gains to the interior and eliminate energy consumption by not needing any active air conditioning. So the materials are of fast construction and high durability and almost no finishes. It's also important to mention that these projects had to be built in 4 months and had to be designed in another 4 months, all from conceptual design to construction documents. So it's quite a challenge. Yeah, it's quite a challenge. And this is the result, the final result. A day before it was opened, we haven't been able to be there because this was inaugurated a little bit before the pandemic kicked in. So yeah, we only have pictures of people that have been able to visit and share them with us. We have these spaces like this platform up here that we didn't want to program. And so later on, we had some videos that people showed us where people are using it in different ways. And that was practically what we were looking for. I wish we could go back and understand better how that's operating and what we can learn from that use. This is the skate park and the vegetation, which also, once it's growing, can provide a better shade for these areas. And then all the materials we used are very cheap, and also nothing that can be broken and needs to be repaired, or as little as possible. The second project for the same area of the city, the northern side of Los Cabos, we call Water Garden, and it's situated next to a junkyard and badly remediated site. So it's a very similar structure, it's just smaller in size, but in this case, we had a river that only appears during rainy seasons, but that runs with such force that destroys everything that that's in its way. So we had to incorporate hydrogeological experts and specialists to help us design and channel this water that flows from all of the upper streets, and then guide it toward some retaining basins and infiltration gardens that would slow it down before it reaches the lower areas and before flooding them. So this is sort of like the behavior of the project and how it's supposed to act. And these are part of the retaining basins and infiltration or bioswales and sponge soils that we suggested for this area. These are just the renderings, and this is a project after it was finished. Also with the same type of vegetation and very cheap materials. But you can also see that in the area surrounding it, there's no streets, there's no pavements, there's no lights, there's nothing. So you can see it here. So these type of projects do have a huge impact for this population. And then also it's a very insecure area. So having light was very relevant for vulnerable populations and for just the perception of security. These are part of the retaining gardens and the covered structure with some services. And finally, there's this project that it's very similar. We're working on it in Tultitlán, state of Mexico, within the same program. But here, they're so close to certain industries that, like the steel industry. So the structures are all made of steel and taking advantage of what we have near. And I'm gonna go really fast through these. There are 5 projects here that we're working on currently. Each one has a color code, and they're all public facilities and public space, sort of like this corridor that we generated to bridge between a huge block where otherwise they would have to walk through. Here you can see it better. This is the path that crosses the whole block and allows people not having to go all around to reach all of the hospitals that are around and the schools and the public amenities nearby. And this is part of the project. This is a construction site as it is, well, a month ago, so it must be further along now. And then we have these other, it's 5 of them. So each one has the same way of interpreting the materials and the same understanding of vegetation and infiltration areas, but each one has its own program. So I'm gonna show them very quickly just to see how the same idea is used in 5 different sites. This is another one, a cultural center, and also has the color coding for the steel structure and the vegetation. This is a market, the main public market of the center of the city. And we're waiting for it to be completed this next month. And finally, to finish off, I want to show you this project of hydric districts that we worked for the case of Tacubaya to the west of Mexico City, which is an applied research project funded by Mexico Innovation Fund grants by Harvard David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, which was coordinated by Anita Berrizbeitia with the support from UNAM. And we worked the project in Oru in collaboration with Arsos Architects. We were awarded the World Landscape Architecture Award of Excellence in the category of concept analysis and planning. So you can see we did a study to understand Mexico City's geographic transformation, as I already showed you a couple of slides ago, and how it changed from a system of 48 rivers and 5 lakes to a thirsty megalopolis with a linear model of water extraction and exploitation. So once we understood how the problem evolved throughout time and how it related to urban development and land ownership, we were able to suggest possibilities for a medium-scale district that I'll explain in a little bit. So this is how the system works, how water is supplied from many kilometers away, being pumped 1,000 kilometers up, using the whole of the energy of Puebla city just to pump that water and bring it in. And all of that, that 22 or almost 30% now of the city's water supply is lost in problems with the pipes in the current pipes that are not well maintained. Only 7% of the water is treated in Mexico City. Most of it goes to the sewage and obviously saturates the sewage. And then we have, since we're extracting 71% of our water needs from the aquifer, there's the problem of land subsidence that anyone who has been in Mexico City can be a witness of it, how these buildings can even change shape. But then we also have the problem of the earthquakes because of it being a lacustrine environment. So when earthquakes hit, they hit differently, whether you're in the mountain side, which is much more stable, transition zones, which was it was hit terribly bad in the last earthquake, 2017. But then in 1985, the prior earthquake, the city center of the lake took a terrible toll of 10,000 people dead for that earthquake. And then the problem is that the solutions are either these huge monumental grayscale infrastructures or piecemeal green infrastructures that are not connected between each other. So we propose going from a linear and extractive model to a decentralized and circular one, where instead of each site requiring the government to provide them with water and sewage, we designed a model where every single drop of water, or at least most of the water that falls within this site could be actually reused and used several times. And so there's this understanding that one building can provide its water through different qualities to other buildings and becoming a system that way. And also having the capacity to store and filter wastewater in different solutions, through different solutions. We also did a historical analysis of the site to understand even its name. Where does Tacubaya's name come from? And it means where water flows. We've forgotten about all of these cultural conditions that once were a very important point. The market, it's called El Chorrito, it's just like the water sprinkler. And we don't see it anymore, but it becomes very relevant when we do a project for these specific areas to somehow unmask history through projects. And then, well, obviously, the current government is working. Well, the current government is working on projects here, but they're not thinking of the water crisis and how they can integrate environmental needs to their development practices. So to us, that becomes an issue. So we put together a number of workshops inviting different stakeholders from government to neighbors to academia to produce this this plan for Tacubaya that could actually operate as a decentralized and a circular system. And we sought to reveal history on the one hand, consolidate and expand the green space system, but also to understand water, urban water as a resource and not a waste. And these are some of the strategic projects that came out of this of these workshops and of all of the analysis we did for the region. And then how we envision this park that's currently in the area, which you can see in the upper image to the right, and how we can convert it into a water infrastructure and then provide for that expansion of green areas within this part of the city. So if we have the present as this monumental centralized gray infrastructure that has forgotten about its hydric past and its future, to hydric districts as alternative models of this decentralized urban water management linked to all of the other projects that are currently being developed but from an integrated and systemic way that can actually think of a transformation towards sustainability instead of a day zero of not having water at all or green areas. And to finish off, I took this quote from an article that we wrote, Sandra Vivanco, Adam Marcus, Marcela Delgado, Diego Ricalde, and myself as professors for the workshop that we shared with CCA. We wrote this article for the magazine Bitácora Arquitectura number 41. We named it Material Cultures, Craft Complexity, and Intuition. And in it, you can find this quote that says the following: whereas ignorance should be avoided in a professional practice, intuition just might provide a way to explore the unknown logic of material. Playful acts, tests, failures, unexpected effects, and further examination of the materiality of things and bodies, as well as their relation to each other, can confirm intuition itself. This, along with the understanding of a material practice that develops through gravitational, physical, and feasible modularity and aggregation, enriches the production of space through time. And to finish off, I want to share with you all these photographs of the day we finished that installation as a result of the 2018 workshop between CCA and UNAM students, where you can see Sandra Vivanco over here, Adam Marcus, myself, Marcela Delgado, and Diego Ricalde somewhere around there. And then obviously the way I love remembering Sandra, which is with amazing food, with family next to her and friends surrounding her, enjoying, you know, all of this dialogue and this conversation that I've tried to put together in this presentation. And that's it. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here and for inviting me.
Elena, thank you so much. That was really wonderful. I think to have you, having known Sandra and shared that teaching experience with her is a really wonderful just connection to have, and then to see your work. And I think the connections are clear in terms of philosophy and values that guide the work with the philosophy and values that guided Sandra's work and teaching. So thank you so much. And to see those projects, the built projects are just beautiful and spare, and I understand probably very economical, and all the more sort of power I think that comes from them for doing that. We have a little bit of time, I think, maybe to have a conversation. This is where it is nice that we have a small room. So maybe, Dalal, we could just see everyone in gallery view.
Yes, it should be gallery view right now, is it not?
I guess we do that on our own. Yeah, okay. So this is a small crew. Adam, what's it like to see yourself 4 years down the road?
I feel old. Elena, thank you so much. That was such a beautiful talk and tribute to Sandra. I think she would love this. And yeah, it's amazing to see the newer projects too, and like the way your studio, your office is able to achieve such sophistication and like and beautiful work, like with limited like economic means is amazing. And I think like an inspiration for us all. I think I mean, I don't know if this is really a question, it's maybe more of a comment, but and it's about the word resilience, which is in the name of your office as well. And I think in the States here, unfortunately, like that word has really been co-opted in many ways as a way to kind of protect, it's thinking about ways to protect capital, like particularly in regard to like sea level rise. And what I love about your work and all of your research is that it really resists that, and puts forward a very different and much more hopeful idea of resilience that's like linking the ecological, the social, the cultural, and I think it's it's a word we come across a lot in our work here, and it's one of those words that like is difficult, is fraught with so many issues now, because it's been co-opted. But I love how you have been able to articulate a much more kind of hopeful version of it.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, when we need it the most, right?
Yeah.
That's when these terms become almost meaningless if they are co-opted by different interests. But that's the thing about, and the same happens to sustainability.
Yeah.
In a way, you know, you hear sustainability, and that's why I mentioned the greenwashing, because when we need them the most, it's when those terms are not there for us to be clear about what we need to do. But resilience, in a way, it's probably different from sustainability, because resilience is a capacity. It's not good or bad, it's a capacity. So depends on what you want to sustain and what you want to resist and what you want to grow strong. So if market interests are trying to resist, that's what they'll do, and they do it really well. So what we need to do is try to help, you know, the most vulnerable populations or communities, whether human or non-human, to have to, you know, to survive, basically. I think it's a survival question behind it. But yeah, I think you're right. It's hard.
Well, I think your work is able to, like I said, like offer a different and more compelling version of their interpretation of that word, which I think is lovely. So
thank you. We try.
Any other questions or comments for Elena? It was, I want to thank you again, Elena. It really was a wonderful talk on this occasion, and to remind us of why we do the work that we do, and who we should be thinking about and serving through the work that we do. So really inspiring in that regard. And I do want to take a moment to also thank Sophia, Sandra's daughter, and Glenn, Sandra's partner, for joining us tonight. This is a really, you know, profound occasion, I know, for you as a family, but also for the work that you're doing in supporting students at CCA in their studies across the college, not just in critical ethnic studies or in architecture, but students in need, students from different backgrounds that have traditionally been underserved through the scholarship in Sandra's name. So thank you both for that, and we are continuing to support that. So with that, I think we can close the night. Elena, I hope that we can have you up here in San Francisco one time. Maybe we can figure out some way that you could come with some of your students to San Francisco, and we could kind of reverse that trip that Adam and Sandra took in 2018. That would be really wonderful. So let's stay in touch to see how we can make that happen.
I would love that.
Good night, everyone, and viva Sandra.
Thank you.